Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the show. It's your host, Danny Haifong. As you can see, I am joined by Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector and U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer, current geopolitical analyst, author, journalist. Scott, good to be back with you.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, everyone hit the like button as you come on. That helps boost the show. And we're just going to get started. Scott, on the fog of war, I wanted to ask you about the events in the last 24 hours because they are quite chaotic and hectic. Even in just the last few hours, we're getting reports on the UAE's air defenses are active. This is coming from the Ministry of Defense over there, for whatever that is worth. They are saying they are dealing with a new round of missile and drone attacks from Iran. And this comes Scott, in the last 24 hours, we heard about the Fujairah report being hit. Iran is saying they didn't hit it, that the U.S. military actually hit it in what was a chaotic scene that led to what Iran is also claiming is the death of a handful of civilians from a boat that was struck that the U.S. CENTCOM claims were small, fast attack boats. But Scott, maybe you can help us understand what's happened in the last 24 hours. Pete Hegseth was up there today saying the Strait of Hormuz is open. The U.S. has reopened it. Project Freedom is working quite well, while Iran is saying that they have still the clamps on the Strait of Hormuz and that the U.S. is violating the ceasefire with each and every attempt to sail their warships through it. So what's your assessment on what's going on right now?
Well, first of all, we have to point out the reality that you, I, and your audience are held hostage to information sources we don't control and we can't, directly vet. So in circumstances like that, I think it's important that we fall back on, we evaluate, past precedent. That was an analytical technique that could be used. Does the source have a history of accurately reporting, or does the source has a history of, making stuff up? And when we do that, we recognize the absolute necessity of taking everything the United States says with a big grain of salt, because the United States has repeatedly lied, exaggerated, fabricated, data to sustain a narrative that isn't necessarily fact-based, but more likely than not designed to, sustain the fantasy that exists in Donald Trump's world. Iran, on the other hand, has a history of being fairly accurate in what they report. And so as things stand, I would just put more weight on the narrative coming out of Iran than I would out of the narrative coming out of the United States.
Yeah, and with the narrative coming out of Iran, we're hearing that the United States is the one that is essentially maybe causing all of this calamity. Iran has said that the United States itself was the one responsible for the Fujairah report. How is all of this, the port exploding, getting hit? But now we're hearing from the UAE itself, which I don't know if that's a reliable source, that they are right now incurring missile strikes. But what do you think is actually happening right now in the Strait of Hormuz? Because this is now the war, it feels like, in the United States is very hard set on this waterway.
Well, we have to be careful when we hear Pete Hegseth speak, because sometimes you need to focus on the lower down you get off of the podium where propaganda is spewed, and the lower you get down to communications that address the reality of the situation on the ground, the closer you are to the truth. You're not going to get the truth from the podium. You'll get the truth, closer to the ground. We have statements from Central Command saying that the U.S. Navy ships will not seek to force the Strait of Hormuz. I think that's probably the truth. We also have statements from the U.S. Navy talking to the vessels seeking to come out of the bottleneck through the Strait of Hormuz, that they should seek the southern passage, but that they need to be very careful. Remember, this is supposed to be Operation, whatever the heck they call it, Freedom Journey or whatever, where the United States is putting the weight of America behind their right to transit. And at the bottom of that, I think that it says that you the ship's captains need to, you know, coordinate with their insurance companies and their owners to make sure that they understand the risks, that there are mines that haven't been cleaned, and that you could be attacked by the Iranians. That doesn't sound like too much of a guarantee of free transit. So we don't know exactly what's going on, but what I will say is this: that people who track shipping through the Strait of Hormuz are not noticing any surge of shipping that would seem to be manifest if indeed the straits were open. Pete Hegseth can speak of a red, white, and blue dome over the Strait of Hormuz, but that's just a straight up lie. The Iranians control the strait and will continue to interdict shipping to the point that no insurance company will underwrite any ship that goes through the straits, regardless of what the United States claims to be doing.
Yeah, and I can just pull up some of the imagery coming out of the Strait of Hormuz that seems to contradict this idea that the United States is moving ships through and everything is reopening. It appears that the only ship as of this morning that was in the Strait of Hormuz right now was an Iranian ship, according to mapping data. But Scott, I wanted to ask you something about what was said here by Dan Raisin Kane. He said something very curious during this briefing that was given this morning about the ceasefire and about what Iran has done. Of course, very little about what the U.S. has done that might have violated the ceasefire itself. But I want your comments on this.
The map shows the examples and samples of Iranian attacks against commercial vessels in the Strait, as well as the Gulf of Oman, and up in the Arabian Gulf. Since the ceasefire was announced, Iran has fired at commercial vessels 9 times and seized 2 container ships. And they've attacked U.S. forces more than 10 times, all below the threshold of restarting major combat operations at this point. You can also see the group of tankers and cargo vessels in the U.S. blockade line, as I mentioned. As a result of Iran's indiscriminate attacks across the region, there are currently 22,500 mariners embarked on more than 1,550 commercial vessels trapped in the Arabian Gulf, unable.
So, Scott, what is this threshold of restarting military operations? Because Iran has been saying since the beginning of the ceasefire that the U.S. is actually the one violating the ceasefire, possibly leading to these tensions that we're talking about now in the Strait of Hormuz.
Well, I mean, it's curious when he speaks of a threshold, but he hasn't defined what the threshold is. So we don't know. It could mean anything. It could be ineffective fire. There are rules of engagement that say that you cannot return fire unless you're receiving effective fire, which means fire that's impacting either your troops or the area immediately in the vicinity of the troops. Then you get to respond. So if the Iranians painted, again, we don't know what the threshold is, but let's put it this way: if you paint me, you acquire me with a target acquisition radar, and you lock on. That is an act of war. I have the right to treat that as an attack and take out your radar. And so American ships could have been painted by Iranian radar. And that could be an action that falls below the threshold. Weapons could have been released, but failed to, fall into the circle around the target deemed to be effective fire. But we don't know what the threshold is. I mean, maybe the Pentagon has published this elsewhere. I'm not aware of it. So it's a meaningless statement. And you have to understand that the job of the General Kane and these others isn't give you accurate information. The job is to give you data that allows the United States to manipulate it to mean what we want it to mean. And so I think they deliberately withheld what constitutes the threshold in order to create a more threatening environment than actually existed. What the Iranians are portraying is far from a situation where they're attacking. It's where the United States comes into a situation and we've viewed things as threats that aren't. Anybody who's been to the region, if you've been to Dubai, for instance, you go down to the port, you'll notice that as you walk along the piers, just an endless row of dhows, small commercial vessels that are used both in terms of intra shipping amongst the Gulf Arab states, but in this situation, more importantly, to transit into Iran. There's a thriving shipping industry using these dhows, these smaller vessels that connects, especially I think Kashim Island is a duty-free zone that allows connectivity with the Gulf Arab states to come in and do trade in a duty-free environment. And so you have these vessels making this transit back and forth. And what it appears to happen is that the United States, when they were making whatever maneuver they were making, misconstrued some of these ships as hostile Iranian ships and began firing on these ships using a variety of methods of engagement. And it may have been one of these weapon systems that was released that found its way to the UAE oil facility, striking and causing a fire, because the Iranians are adamant that they weren't responsible for this. They didn't do this. And, in this day and age of radar tracking, understand this. If the Iranians had launched this attack, there would be radar evidence. And the fact the United States isn't putting out the radar evidence to back this up only underscores that something's going on. We haven't, in fact, put out any data. When in the Caribbean, when we sink these so-called narcotic ships, we publish those videos instantaneously. Here, we've published nothing because I think they recognize that when subjected to scrutiny, that it will show something other than the narrative that has been published by the United States. This is almost like a Gulf of Tonkin type situation.
Yeah. Maybe elaborate on that, especially in the context of the UAE here, because the UAE seems to be thick in the middle of what the U.S. narrative is around what's been going on in the Strait of Hormuz, in the Persian Gulf, or the Arabian Gulf, as they call it. And I'm curious on what your thoughts are about the UAE's position here. I mean, they're the ones who did get hit. And they're the ones saying that their air defenses are activated. They just left OPEC. It seems like they're playing a very special role in this latest escalation.
Well, the UAE is a very aggressive member of the implementation group seeking to make the Abrams Accord a reality. The Abrams Accord, of course, is the policy put together by Donald Trump and his administration in his first term, that's designed to promote peace between the Gulf Arab states and Israel, to create at least a greater Israel from an economic standpoint, to create the economic foundation upon which a greater Israel would be based. So it's very much part of the Zionist enterprise, and the UAE is an extension of that. We speak of the United States and Israel carrying out the surprise attack on February 28th, but the silent partner was the United Arab Emirates. They were heavily involved in facilitating this from an intelligence collection standpoint to operational sustainment standpoint, political sustainment standpoint. So they are a party to the conflict. They try to paint themselves as the victim, but they're not the victim. They are the aggressor. And they are promoting, again, this concept of a greater Israel. And so Iran has rightfully viewed them as the enemy and has struck them accordingly. So now we go into phase two. Notice that the other Gulf Arab states are very reticent. In fact, many of them have articulated a desire to distance themselves from the United States because of the fact that we are in an existential war of survival with Iran, and as the closer you get to reaching a culminating moment, the more at risk the Gulf Arab states are. Iran has said that if the United States begins large-scale attacks against Iranian targets, especially Iranian energy targets, that they are going to take out the totality of energy production for Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, and perhaps even Saudi Arabia. Iran has demonstrated the capacity to do this. So, it's a very dangerous situation. One that the United Arab Emirates has decided that they're going to. They don't want to be part of the team that says it's time for America to leave. In fact, they're doubling down on keeping America in the game. A piece of information that came out late last week that wasn't known previously is that Israel had dispatched its Iron Dome system to the United Arab Emirates, complete with troops. So it's not just the systems, but Israeli troops were on the ground defending the United Arab Emirates against Iranian attack. They did this with no other Gulf Arab nation, only the United Arab Emirates, which again solidifies the notion that the United Arab Emirates is part of this greater Israeli enterprise. And the other thing is that they have made the strategic decision to decouple from OPEC Plus. That means they are no longer part of a cartel that collaborates on controlling energy supplies in a way to maintain market stability over the long term, but they want to go their own way. And you have to ask yourself why. One, of course, is the linkage between the United Arab Emirates and this greater Israeli project. And they realize they have to de-link from the rest of the Gulf Arab states politically in order to be able to stay on board. But this also means it becomes more difficult for the United Arab Emirates to, participate in a collaboration designed to, influence global energy markets to a way that may not be in favor of the United States or Israel now that they're on Team Zion. So they did that. And the other thing is, I think that the United Arab Emirates is in extraordinarily difficult straits right now. They haven't been able to export energy to the degree they want. They've been struck by the Iranians who are hitting them at will, and have shown the ability to hit them at will. And, they're desperate, a financial desperate situation. They, went back to Pakistan and withdrew money they had provided the Pakistanis as part of a program to stabilize Pakistan's foreign cash reserves so they can buy energy. They said, we want that money back, several $1 billion. And they followed up by, evicting 15,000 Pakistani civilians who were working in UAE and seizing their bank accounts. So all the money that they had earned, the UAE seized. Why? Because I think the UAE is in an emergency situation. I think they're in a lot of trouble right now. And things are only going to get worse. If Iran makes the decision to take out the totality of the UAE energy production, then that's the end of the United Arab Emirates. If Iran decides to take out water desalination plants, that's the end of fresh water. That's the end of Abu Dhabi and Dubai as modern cities. So this is a war of existential survival now for Abu Dhabi, for Dubai, for the United Arab Emirates.
Speaking of trouble, how much trouble is the United States in if it restarts strikes on Iran? There's been multiple reports. I mean, several days we've heard next 24 hours, or CNN is reporting again that Israel and the United States are coordinating another round of strikes to occur sometime imminently. But speaking of economic woes, there's a big overheating right now in the U.S. economy, especially around gas prices, that it seems the United States, Donald Trump himself and the administration are doing their best to manipulate and finagle around and try to cool down with at any moment that they can. So how much trouble is the United States in if they begin striking Iran again?
Well, even without striking Iran, we're in a tremendous amount of trouble. When one looks at the global energy markets, understand that, these markets, it's always dangerous to rely upon television programs, especially those that are fictional in nature, to create, illustrations of reality. But a good program that's out there for this purpose is Landman. I think Billy Bob Thornton plays a role in this show. But early on in season 1, he's explaining, the reality of the oil business to a lawyer, and he's talking about the price of oil. And he said, look, we're in the oil business and we like to make money, but you got to understand that if the price of oil goes up too much, you get a pinch at the pump, and it creates a political problem for the consumer. We can't have that. He said, and then if it goes too low, of course, we can't afford. The sweet spot for the price of oil is around $78 a barrel. And that's about where it is today. Maybe it could go up to, 80 something. But that allows you to make money, but it also allows consumers to continue to consume and not cut back, because the moment consumers start cutting back, then you've got an overproduction problem and you're not making as much money as you thought you were going to make. And so the reason why I brought this up is that the world doesn't exist with massive supplies of oil that can just flood the market. The way energy production works is that they produce enough energy in a given window to meet expected demand. They have a little bit of buffer built in, but you can't have too much buffer because there's a finite amount of storage out there, and you don't want to keep money floating like that. You want to keep it going. And so energy is flowing out of the Middle East. 22% of the world's energy, supplies come from the Middle East. Not just that, but I think there's a more significant number of fertilizer that comes out. We are in planting season, and the world doesn't have enough fertilizer. Helium, which is an ingredient that's used in major, technical production. Qatar produced a bunch of it. None of it's coming out. There's, the market. All this stuff was in a pipeline that was designed with sustainability in mind, meaning no major disruptions. On February 28th, that pipeline got pinched. Now, we in the West, how long has the Strait of Hormuz been closed? For many, many weeks now. And yet, we're seeing a hit at the pump, but it's just more money. We've paid more money for gas in the past, so it truly hasn't impacted us yet, because we're living off of the energy that had been put into the supply chain in the pipeline, so to speak, on February 28th, and that's made its way across the Pacific. The last of that energy, the end, landed in California yesterday. It's going to go to refineries, be refined into product, and then go out. And when that's done, there's nothing behind it. That's the way the world is right now. There's no energy coming out of the Middle East, out of the Persian Gulf region. Kuwait, a major energy producer, 0 oil shipped last month. Saudi Arabia has seen a significant drop. The United Arab Emirates, a significant drop. And we're seeing this resonate around the world. We're seeing shortages in Australia, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan. And soon there's going to be shortages in the United States because, as I said, there's nothing coming behind. So when that happens, we've got a major crisis because our economy runs on oil. You take oil away, our economy doesn't function. And it's not just about fuel for gas, although that's important. Everything we do in life, oil plays a role. Oil is involved in everything, every aspect of our life, from making plastics and things of that nature. So when we run out of oil, people go, Scott, we're energy self-sufficient, but understand that our energy market is plugged into the global energy market. So we feel the shortages of the world in terms of how it impacts, pricing. And, we can call ourselves energy independent, but when the price of, Brent goes up to, $150, $200 a barrel, the oil companies are making money. They're not going to turn that off. They don't run a charity. They're not going to say, well, I know it's selling at $200 a barrel, but we're going to continue selling it to you at 78 because that's the fair price. That's not how it works. Unless the government can subsidize this, flood the market with strategic reserves, you're not going to manage this price. We have been managing it politically by creating crises, and over the weekend, and then on Monday having a miracle happen, and you see the fluctuation. And there's a lot of data that shows that there's been some serious insider trading by people close to the White House who are making hundreds of millions of dollars off of shorting oil or going long on oil, depending on what tweet the president's going to put out. But it's a known that when the president puts out a social media posting, that there will be market implications. And so people who have advanced notice of a presidential tweet or presidential posting are making the appropriate investments and just raking in the money. So there's there's that taking place, but they're the only ones making money. Everybody else is going to lose money. And very soon we're going to be looking at a very real energy crisis, one that could be catastrophic in nature, not only for the United States, but especially for Europe, for our European allies. They're going to suffer egregiously. In Asia, our Asian allies, the same thing. And there is no cavalry coming to the rescue because the world doesn't have instantly available excess energy production to tap into. If they're going to start producing more oil out of Saudi Arabia, they've got to begin to do things even then, once the oil enters the pipeline, there's a 6 to 8 week gap where nothing entered. So no matter what, this summer, we're going to be riding out a major economic crisis. And if it lasts long enough, businesses won't survive. Already in Europe, Lufthansa, a major European airline, had to lay off or cancel 20,000 flights. They're going to cancel more. Croatian Air and other airlines have stopped training crew because they say we're actually looking at probably having to put people on furlough or shut down the crew. Europe's going to lose civil aviation. The United States, Delta's already going through a crisis right now because of high fuel prices. And so, there's going to be a huge impact when diesel goes through the roof. Those truckers are going to stop driving because it costs too much for them to drive across country. And if they can't drive across country, the goods are going to stay in the port. How do we get our food to New York? How do we get our Chinese electronics to New York? How do we get anything anywhere? The answer is we don't. And this is what our summer is going to look like. On the 250th anniversary of the United States, we're probably going to be neck deep in a major economic crisis brought on by the president's decision to go to war when no war was necessary.
Yeah, great point, Scott. And we're seeing the beginnings of this too. I mean, we had Spirit Airlines close. We're also hearing that JetBlue is weeks to perhaps a month away from total bankruptcy itself. Many are up in arms about Delta now cutting back on snacks and water bottles. I mean, there is a definitely looming here. And that begs the question, Scott, is this whole Project Freedom that the Trump administration has declared and is engaging in, is it a direct response to this reality? And I just want to pull up what CENTCOM posted about it. Is this sustainable in the even short-term, medium-term? With CENTCOM kind of boasting about all of its capabilities, the F-16, there's 100 land and sea-based aircraft that are supporting this. Is this a sustainable operation? And is it really, is this all a response to kind of the panic that is being, I think, reverberated because of the fallout that you just mentioned?
Well, I think we have to start again with just a statement of fact. The United States had spent a tremendous amount of time together with Israel preparing for the surprise attack that took place on February 28th. This was a major military campaign that bombed Iran in a sustained, incessant fashion for nearly 40 days. The best intelligence we had, which wasn't that good to begin with, but the best intelligence we had was used to select the targets. And we bombed everything worth bombing, and we made zero impact on the Iranians. Again, I just during the Gulf War, I was one of my jobs was battle damage assessment. So I was down in the basement with the targeting cell. So I was familiar with the targets. I was familiar with the totality of the strategic air campaign, and I had specific areas that I was responsible for monitoring, like Scud missile production and other weapons of mass destruction production, chemical industries, etc. And so I know when we bombed them, why we bombed them, and what we bombed them with. And I tracked it. I tracked the destruction and wrote reports reflective of what the assessment was. And we gave ourselves very high grades in the strategic air campaign. The one area where we failed egregiously was, of course, mobile missile launchers. But everything else, we blew up the factories, or so we thought. When the war ended, I got brought into the United Nations Special Commission responsible for overseeing the disarmament of Iraq, and was able to go to Iraq within months of the war ending, seeing the very locations that we had bombed, locations that I had deemed to have been destroyed. And that translates into diminished industrial capacity. What we found out, though, is that we blew up a bunch of empty buildings, that the production equipment that we were hoping to destroy that was inside these buildings had been evacuated. In 1996, General Al-Abidi, he was the Minister of Oil at the time. He used to be the Deputy for Ministry of Defense Industry, the guy that was responsible for building weapons of mass destruction prior to the Gulf War breaking out in January of 1991. He had ordered shortly after the war a top to bottom review of battle damage, meaning they go to every place, find out every bomb the United States dropped, every missile the United States dropped, and what was done. And in 1996, he had the report. And while he didn't give me a copy of it, he did allow me to his desk and go through it, just to make the point that we didn't accomplish anything in Desert Storm. The only people that did accomplish anything were the inspectors. We're the ones that went in and found the material that had been hidden by the Iraqis that were supposed to be in the buildings that we had blown up. The reason why I bring this up is that today we have everybody patting themselves on the back, Pete Hegseth, the president, about what a great job we did. I'm here to tell you right now that it is more likely than not that we didn't destroy anything of value in the nearly 40 days of bombing, that we bombed empty buildings or we bombed buildings that had been misidentified, but the sensitive production equipment that it was inside there no longer is there. And we now know in ballistic missile, for instance, production, that a lot of the production facilities that were at Parchin, a major missile production facility, have been moved underground to include the ability to produce solid rocket motors. It's all underground. We didn't destroy it. We blew up empty buildings. That's it. And so now we're the ones who begged for a ceasefire. I need to remind people of that. It wasn't the Iranians that said we want a ceasefire. The Iranians said the exact opposite. It took Pakistan and China to come in and tell the Iranians, you are going to go along with this because China needed the Strait of Hormuz opened up so they could get their oil. But it was the United States that begged for the ceasefire. And there's a reason, because we hadn't accomplished what we wanted to accomplish and we're about to feel tremendous economic pain. Nothing has changed that's going to change that outcome. If we decide to resume so-called kinetic actions against the Iranians, ask yourself right off the bat, what's the target? If we started this war with the best targets plugged in and we bombed all these targets, what's the target deck? Now, I know we're collecting intelligence, so what we've found hide sites, we found sites where the Iranians move things to, we've refined the target deck. If that's the case, again, the Iranians have been watching us fight for over 2 decades now in Afghanistan and Iraq. They know everything about how we operate. And so if you think for a second, the Iranians have just gone static. There's a ceasefire, cease moving, everybody dig in, calm down, stay in one place so the Americans can photograph you and target you. No, the Iranians are moving nonstop because they know how we work. They understand the reality of intelligence collection, that once a piece of information is collected, that takes time for the data to go back, be assessed, looked at, a target folder put up, transmitted into targetable coordinates that are plugged into the system, and the missile is launched. This doesn't happen instantaneously. And so the Iranians understand that cycle. And so as we collect and we're processing, the Iranians are reshuffling the deck. So by the time we have data in a weapon system able to strike a target, the target's no longer there. This is the reality. And so I don't know what we think we're going to accomplish by going back to war. Einstein has been attributed with the statement, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome. It will be insane for us to resume bombing, thinking that somehow this time we're going to win. We're not. It's just going to continue the failures of the past. The Iranians, on the other hand, have not only shown an ability to survive the best we could bring to bear, but thrive. Today, they're producing more ballistic missiles underground than they produced above ground before the war. I'll say that one more time just so the audience understands. Today, the Iranians are producing more ballistic missiles below ground than they produced above ground. There's a historical precedent. You know, we during World War II, we targeted German fighter production. We wanted to bomb their fighter production so they couldn't build fighters to challenge us in the air. And as the war progressed, you know, the most German fighters were built, I think, in the second half of 1944, you know, after we've been bombing the hell out of them because they went underground. That's what's happened here. So our bombing campaign has accomplished absolutely nothing. We have not achieved any of our objectives.
Yeah, and you know, just to get a bit of perspective on this too, you know, in light of the next question I wanted to ask you, Iran has not been, not only have they not been sitting on their hands militarily, but they've also been rebuilding quite rapidly, almost taking a note from the Chinese and how fast things are going up. But according to Iran's housing foundation, Al Jazeera reported that about 37,000 houses and commercial buildings that were damaged in the war have been rebuilt and repaired. So that, I mean, that's a massive thing. And I've even seen things that, you know, can't verify the veracity of things on social media necessarily, but I've seen Iranians post that. They're all over X and they're posting about how, you know, their society is very, very hunkered down for war and actually doing everything they can to provide what people need in times of war, which only makes it more difficult for war to break the backs of people. But now I wanted to ask you, though, Scott, about the diplomatic kind of flurry we've seen in the alternative mode of development in the world, the multipolar world. We saw Arachi and Putin meet recently, and then Putin talked to Donald Trump. Now we have Abbas Arachi going to Beijing, where he's going to meet with his counterpart Wang Yi. And then we're going to have perhaps, supposedly, in the next week or so, about 9 days, Trump meet with Xi Jinping. This, at least, is reportedly the case as of right now. So what do you make of these developments? So Iran has been definitely making a lot of diplomatic activity of late, especially when it comes to Russia and now China and Pakistan, and regionally, it's been quite a flurry. What is there anything significant about this?
Well, let's start again. We always have to start at some place, and let's start with the following factual statement: the United States is agreement incapable, which is important to understand when we speak of Araghchi going to Russia and Araghchi going to China. Why? Some people say it's to create the conditions for a successful negotiation with the United States. Wrong. The United States is incapable of making an agreement. We can't be trusted. This speaks volumes about how this war is going to end, because people who think this is going to end with some sort of concession-based agreement between Iran and the United States, where Iran gives away on certain points, and the United States now has an agreement. The United States cannot make an agreement with Iran. We're incapable of it. We can't sustain it. We're liars. We're cheaters. We're thieves. We're scoundrels. We were negotiating with the Iranians back in June when the Israelis attacked with our permission, our support, and on February 28th when we surprise attacked them together with Israel. The Iranians have now understood that there is no deal to be had, no agreement to be had in the United States, because the United States can't be trusted at all. Zero trust. And so what they're doing is they're going to other parties to see what kind of framework can be built in this non-negotiation environment. How do you deal with the United States when there can be no agreement, because the United States will never adhere to an agreement where we can't be trusted? And so they've reached out to the Russians, and of course Vladimir Putin made the phone call to Donald Trump, but the Russians are the one who came up with the term agreement incapable. It's a Russian belief that Donald Trump is incapable, the United States is incapable of an agreement. And for the Russians, this redefines their entire diplomatic approach to the United States. If you go back to December of 2021, when they submitted draft treaties to both the United States and NATO, both of those treaties said right up front that the way this crisis ends in Ukraine is with treaties in writing, ratified, that have consequences for failure to comply. This is the Russian approach. This is what an agreement-capable nation does. But Russia now has come to the reality that the United States is agreement incapable. There will never be a successful negotiation with the United States so long as Donald Trump is in power. So how do you live with an America like this? And that's the issue that Iran and Russia are struggling with. Iran and China are struggling with. The Chinese, too, are coming to the understanding that you simply can't negotiate with the United States because the United States is incapable of negotiating in good faith. If you take a look at some major things that have happened with China and the United States recently, you have, the United States put pressure on Panama to close down, a Chinese-operated port in the Canal Zone. The Chinese responded by basically saying any company that does business in this port facility will never be allowed access to China. So nobody's doing business because everybody wants and needs access to China, and that's their retaliation. And now the United States, of course, has sought to put sanctions on Chinese oil refineries that buy Iranian oil, and the Chinese government has come in and said, no. If anybody puts secondary sanctions on Chinese companies for doing their business, then China will retaliate. China's not putting up with this anymore. So I don't know what the president thinks he's going to accomplish by going to meet with the Chinese at this juncture, but the Chinese are not in the business of trying to facilitate a negotiated settlement to a conflict, knowing that the United States is agreement incapable. And so we're looking at the rest of the world seeking to build a framework that allows for the sustainment of economic discourse between these parties, and keep the United States out of it. Block the United States from being able to interfere, and it also means that the way this is resolved isn't through a compromise, but through the absolute defeat of the United States. That it's not about giving Donald Trump the opportunity to walk away. That would be an agreement which which Iran knows the United States will violate, but to crawl away. That is, look, the ball's in there, and the Iranians are driving this thing. There was a cute little meme where Donald Trump said, "I have all the cards," and he's holding cards in his hands. But if you look, it's an Uno deck, and you know how you lose Uno. You lose Uno by having all the cards. And then you show the Iranians and they got fewer cards and they're the right cards that they can throw away. And so Iran's winning. Iran's going, that's right, you've got all the cards. This is where we're at right now. The United States is probably not going to be given a face-saving mechanism out. The Russians are working on that. But again, the United States is agreement incapable. We're not capable of having a momentary moment of integrity where we can sit down and negotiate in good faith. It's got to be a very frustrating experience for the Russians and for the Chinese, both of whom believe in international law, contract law, treaty law, and both of whom are continuously frustrated by America's inability to stick to a deal.
Yeah, and we've seen China make a pretty big step in publicly authorizing through the central government that companies essentially ignore all U.S. sanctions, particularly on Iran, which they've done anyway, but to make this a matter of policy is really definitely a step up in it. And I mean, some have surmised that this meeting won't happen at all, but even if it does, Scott, maybe you can help us understand. We have the two major wars in the world right now, of course, the U.S. war on Iran and the proxy war on Russia by U.S. NATO. Both these conflicts seem to be heading in a similar direction where the United States is showing no interest in negotiating what are actually fair terms based on the realities on the ground. So are they both headed toward essentially the only solution being the United States losing and having to pull back and pull out? And how that seems like a very long venture indeed, with a lot of pain and consequences for the world, if that's the case.
Well, let me again just make the following, because you just asked a very pertinent question. And if you have other analysts on here, geopolitical analysts, military analysts, they'll go through a similar thought process that I would go through to, to treat that question with the, the accuracy that it deserves. But see, we'd be doing standard geopolitical analysis. We'd be doing standard military analysis, standard political analysis. That's not how this works anymore. The United States no longer functions as as the nation state that it used to be. A state, a constitutional republic where the presidency is, the powers of the presidency are held in check by, the notion of checks and balances, separate but equal branches of government, a judiciary that was independent, and a legislative branch that, controlled the power of the purse and could say no to a sitting executive. We have forgotten the warnings issued by James Madison when he wrote the Federalist 10 and Federalist 51, the warnings of factionalism, to avoid it at all costs, and just in case factionalism does take hold and seek to empower an executive with near tyrannical powers, that we have checks and balances, and that we have to maintain these checks and balances to preserve the constitutional republic. Well, that's been all thrown away. We don't function as a constitutional republic today. We function as a cult of personality, where Donald Trump has transformed himself from, the chief executive of a constitutional republic to a dictator, a self-anointed dictator. He called himself a dictator at the World Economic Forum, where he also acknowledged that he doesn't believe in the Constitution. He believes only in his personal sense of moral, what's right and wrong. No, I'm sorry, you're the American president. The Constitution defines what you believe in and what you don't believe in, but he doesn't believe in the Constitution. And if you take a look at his pattern of behavior, I mean, his social media postings alone, the other day where he posted 11 within a very short period of time, often which were violent, contradictory, and always promoting himself, we can clearly say that Donald Trump suffers from narcissistic personality disorder of the most malignant kind. This means that, he is antisocial, and he is psychotic in his antisocial behavior. Now, in the state of New York, that diagnosis can get you involuntarily committed, meaning that the state has the right to come in and put you into an insane asylum until they can get treatment that makes you compatible with society. We have a president who's literally insane. Literally insane. Now, I know the MAGA mouth breathers out there won't like when I say that, but I don't care, because it's an accurate reflection to prove me wrong. If anybody's going to try and say what this president does is normal, then you're not normal. This president behaves in a manner which is totally incompatible with how government's supposed to be functioned. And so that's my way of saying, Danny, that if you're trying to look at this from a standard geopolitical standpoint, you're not solving the problem. The problem isn't a geopolitical problem. The problem is a domestic political problem linked to the fact that we have a cult of personality that has hijacked the American presidency, and that we have a Congress that has subordinated itself to this cult of personality, and we have a Supreme Court, a judiciary that either is working in open alliance with this president, or is just being ignored. The Supreme Court being ignored, its warnings ignored. So, this is where we're at. You can't solve a problem unless you accurately define the problem to begin with. And if you're defining this problem as a geopolitical problem, there will be no solution, because the solution doesn't lie on the reality on the ground. The solution relies on the fantasy in the mind of Donald Trump, what he deems to be relevant. And so we need to, understand that if we're going to be talking about how do we solve this problem, the question is, how do we, manufacture a narrative that will allow this president to walk away from this war. The narrative doesn't have to be fact-based. We know it won't be fact-based, but it has to be a narrative that the president feels comfortable enough, committing to, so that he is politically viable. This is about Donald Trump's political legacy. This is about the world that exists between Donald Trump's left earlobe and right earlobe. And that's the only thing that we should be talking about if we're looking for a solution to this problem. And that's why I think Iran has gone to Russia and China, because we know now that Russia understands that this U.S. government is agreement incapable, which, it's interesting. I don't know. Do you talk to Gilbert Doctorow?
I do not. I never have. But
okay. Well, I know
that,
President Napolitano does, and all that. And I read what he writes just because he puts us down. We're apparently some sort of, Putin apologist cabal, the alternative media darlings, he calls us, who are unrealistic in everything we say about Russia. But he was very critical of Vladimir Putin's phone call to Donald Trump because he said it was demeaning for Vladimir Putin to be talking about Donald Trump surviving another assassination attempt, and demeaning to be talking about, Melania Trump and all this stuff. How dare Vladimir Putin talk that? And what I would say to Gilbert Doctorow is Vladimir Putin is a genius and you're not, because Vladimir Putin understands that the problems that are faced today are not geopolitical in nature, but psychological in nature. And Vladimir Putin is playing the psychological manipulation game because that's the only game out there when you're dealing with a malignant narcissist who's sitting at the helm of the United States government, a man who's created a cult of personality. And if you're going to make any inroads into influencing the thought process of this psychotic, antisocial narcissist, you have to stroke his ego. And that's what Vladimir Putin did. It wasn't demeaning for him to do that. It was necessary. And I think you're going to see the Chinese working a similar game, although the Chinese aren't as good at it as Russia is. But if there's going to be a meeting, it's going to be a meeting where the Chinese are going to have to manipulate Donald Trump's, psychologically. It's not going to be a meeting that's going to be, focused on reality per se, because we already know that the Chinese have drawn a red line, a line in the sand. So have the Russians. And again, I always love it when Gilbert Doctorow talks about the weakness of Russia. I don't know. Hey, Gil, what'd you think of that last post of the Russian Ministry of Defense about Victory Day? If the Iranians or if the Ukrainians do attack Russia on Victory Day, what did they say they were going to do? Oh, yeah. They've ordered all civilians and diplomats to evacuate the center of Kiev because they are going to rain down fire and hell with ballistic missiles, eradicating the entire center of that city. That's weak, Maybe you don't understand what Russia's been doing over the course of the past several years. They've been doing something that goes far beyond simply trying to win a non-war, because it is a non-war. They've been, dealing with sanctions. They've been dealing with the economic problems that accrue. There's a reason why there's healthy economy, and that's because Russia hasn't gone into full war mode. I'm just bringing this because Gilbert Doctorow and others out there, Seymour Hersh just published another piece in his Substack, which just, again, manifestly underscores the level of ignorance that exists within Seymour Hersh's brain about Russian reality. But it's the thing is, it's thoughts like this that people pick up upon to create a counter narrative that gets fed to the president of the United States. A lot of the thinking right now about Iran is driven by the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy, FDD, which is a Washington, D.C. think tank that is literally an adjunct of the Israeli Foreign Ministry. In fact, when it was first created, they had it was with a Hebrew word, so at least they were honest that they worked for the foreign ministry. Today, they pretend to be this independent, nonpartisan think tank, but it's an Israeli operation. And they're the ones who are making up narratives that are fed to Scott Bessent, fed to Marco Rubio, and then fed to the president, and fed to Pete Hegseth, so they can create this fictional narrative around which the president, creates his fake world that he operates in. There's no reality here. There's no reality about Russia. There's no reality about Iran. There's no reality about anything. And if you've got to understand that when we talk about Washington, D.C. today and problem solving, we have to bring in the human dimension and the fact that we have this narcissistic president who's mentally ill. And how do you have a logic-based conversation with a mentally ill individual? The answer is you don't.
Yeah, and I've seen arguments too floating around about Iran, China, Russia, that these countries need to fight the U.S. head on very directly if they're ever going to succeed in moving forward and developing in the way that they want. We've been talking a lot, Scott, over the years, and despite the massive volume of critics, at least in terms of the noise decibel, on everything that you just said. We hear, I mean, the reality speaks for itself. Iran right now is stronger than it was before February 28th. Russia is stronger than it was prior to February 2022. China, why would the hell would China need to fight the United States head on when it keeps growing at this breakneck pace? And it seems like actually things like the Iran war can help very key industries that it has, like its own renewable energy industry. Why would it need to fight the U.S. head on? I mean, I feel like there's a lot of bluster and kind of chest thumping that goes into analyzing the current world situation when it seems that the world is moving in a different direction from the United States. And this isn't to say that the United States can't cause damage, that it can't certainly make things very difficult, and that it doesn't have any power projection at all. Certainly that is would be a complete a lie. But at the same time, I don't see where a lot of the arguments we've been making over the years have been burst asunder. We have Hezbollah fighting not only for its life, but fighting in a very valiant manner. One that shows that Hezbollah was not dead after the 2024 ceasefire. So we can go on and on and on, but the examples are there, and the world seems to be shifting in the direction that we've been talking about. It's shifting in contrary to this whole, like, well, Russia's weak for not doing this, and China's weak for not doing that, and Iran is weak for not, amassing 1 million troops and marching thousands of kilometers to confront the Israeli regime. Like these fantastical notions. But your final reaction to this, and us, we have about 4 or 5 minutes left. I don't know. I see the reality. I think these are just facts. I'm not even speaking ideologically here.
Yeah. Again, I just want to start off that if you and I are going to be held accountable, and I think anybody who speaks publicly should be held accountable for their words, then people need to be fair, because you and I are trying, or we're trying, to connect the dots in a fact-based world. And it's frustrating when you say, okay, logic, because I just want to remind people that I did this professionally for a number of years. The dots I connected impacted national level decision making in the United States. It impacted the decisions made by General Schwarzkopf during the Gulf War. It impacted major arms control decisions. It impacted decisions about war and peace. My dot connecting advised presidents of the United States, and advised secretary generals, advised prime ministers of a number of foreign nations. And every time I presented a connect the dot type assessment, it turned out to be right. So I have a pretty good track record of doing this. I'm one of the better connect the dot people out there. But to do connect the dot analysis, it has to be fact-based. You have to deal with a world that has rules and regulations. There has to be, an environment where when you connect dots, you can predict outcomes, you can predict behavior patterns. With Donald Trump, we're literally talking about an insane man. And there are no dots to be connected because they don't exist. He's a man who can change the playing field, literally 1 minute after he defines it with a certain social media post. So it becomes almost impossible to connect the dot analysis, because there is no stability. There is no foundation of reality here. We're dealing with a fantasy world in the mind of a sick, demented individual. And he's surrounded by people who are incapable of telling him no. And so, people keep saying, well, what's going to happen in the future? I don't know. Can you predict the future actions of an insane individual? And the answer is no, you can't. What we can predict is economic reality. And we know, for instance, now that the pipeline has run out. The last energy shipment that left the Middle East on February 28th arrived in California yesterday, and there's nothing in the pipeline following it, which means we are going to have an economic crash. Oil is going to go through the roof, and there's no amount of manipulation that can be done to change that. The president might be able to do things with a tweet here and there in order to manipulate the market, so he and his children and the people close to him make millions of dollars through insider trading by hedging or by going long or going short. It's criminal activity, and the fact that nobody's calling it out, or when they called out, nobody's taking action. We literally have a criminal cartel in power today, literally. I mean, the market manipulation is, that's where you can connect the dots very easily on the posts the president puts out, and the bets that are made or the investments that are made, and how the posts influence that and how people make a lot of money. But that's a game you can only play for a certain period of time before reality kicks in. The reality is going to kick in soon. There's going to be an absolute collapse of the market, and collapse of the American economy. Prices are going to go through the roof. And this is political suicide for this president who has a midterm election coming up. And how does the midterm election then, the fact that there may not be a pathway to victory for this president, that he may have dug himself such a deep hole that conventional political behavior no longer applies, and therefore he'll say that he has no other option but to shoot the moon, go all in, or whatever stupid phrase that Pete Hegseth will come up to justify, continued war crimes. And so it's impossible. It's impossible to come up with sound analysis to say, well, this is what's going to happen tomorrow. Logically speaking, we should have walked away from this war the moment we should never have gotten involved in this war. But we did. And the moment we had the ceasefire, the president should have declared victory and gone home and, found a way. I mean, there's ways to spin it. The Russians say that they're ready to help remove the 60% enriched uranium from Iran, bring it in and dilute it, make it no more. Sounds like a victory to me. Wouldn't you think so? I mean, if we say that that's our biggest worry about nuclear weapons capability, get rid of it. But this president didn't, and now he can't. There are other things that we could have done. We could have negotiated with the Iranians some sort of mechanism that guaranteed shipping out of the Strait of Hormuz. That's a victory. We suddenly emptied all the tankers. We have the global economy. Victory, 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 winning, 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 winning. But that's logical connection of the dots, and we're not allowed to do that because Donald Trump is a psychotic, insane individual, incapable of consistent performance over time.
Yeah, it's certainly a hole that's getting bigger and bigger the longer that goes on. I mean, even just in the last couple hours, there were reports by Reuters about the latest intelligence assessment on Iran's nuclear capabilities. It's a so-called nuclear program, and it's unchanged. And that didn't have to be the case because Iran was more than willing to negotiate throughout this, before the hostilities, and then of course during the ceasefire, has been more than willing to negotiate terms on a phased negotiation process that would lead to perhaps outcomes that both sides, all sides could like and could agree to. Iran certainly isn't going into things maximalist like the U.S., but here we are. Trump seems to not be able to pull back from maximalist kinds of demands, and therefore Iran has no reason to make any kind of even reasonable concessions that would just end the war. Not even concessions that would hurt Iran. Just things that could just end this. But here we are. Yeah, we'll have to keep talking about this, guy, because it seems like we're in for a more bumpy, above a bumpy ride ahead in the weeks and months as we enter the hot summer around the world. But I want to make sure everyone knows that your website and your Substack are in the video description, scottritter.com. So definitely go there and support Scott's work.
A quick. We brought up Gilbert Doctorow, and he has a alternative viewpoint. But it's important to understand that the world isn't static. The world changes. The world moves. Russia's entering the fifth year of this conflict, a conflict that I and others didn't believe would last more than a couple weeks early on. I thought the Russians were committed to a war. It turns out they were committed to a negotiation, but the United States is negotiation incapable. And so it's turned into this prolonged war that went from getting Ukraine to the negotiating table to a proxy conflict against the collective West, a completely different conflict. The Russian economy today is completely different than the economy that existed at the beginning of this conflict, or even the economy that existed 2 years ago. Everything about Russia, the internal domestic realities of Russia, have also altered over time as Putin consolidates power in a time of war. And these are things that you don't do. You don't get this information best long distance. It's better to go there. And so I will be traveling to Russia again for an extended period of time, the purpose of which is to, get up to speed on as much of the present Russian reality. I've always said when I go to Russia, my job is to collect the Russian reality and bring it back to the United States to help overcome Russophobia. But if I'm operating on a 2-year-old information, what I do is I actually reinforce the Russophobes, because I might be saying things that were accurate 2 years ago, but may not be accurate today, and then allows them to denigrate and weaken the argument. So it's important that you stay constantly up to speed. So if you could go to my website, scottritter.com, it'll take you to my Substack. Just so you know up front, the Substack, all the information on the Substack is free of charge. So if you want to go on and read it and do a free subscription, so be it. I mean, that's what it's there for. The subscription to Substack pays my bills. That means that's how I pay my mortgage. That's how I pay the power. That's how I feed the dogs. For those who don't like when Maverick barks, here's your chance. But don't subscribe. But my trips are done through donations. I'm an independent journalist, like Danny, like everybody else, and it's done off the donation page. And I would also say this. I'm reading comments, and I guess I shouldn't, but there's people out there promoting Brian Bertolek. Please, he's an independent journalist. Support him. Support Gilbert Doctorow. If that's your cup of tea, support it. Support Danny Haiphong. You're here. Don't just come here and watch. Come here and contribute. Keep Danny in business. This is independent media. This discussion that we're having, you will not find on mainstream media at all. And if you rely upon mainstream media, which is corporate controlled, by the way, other people are paying all those bills, then you just fall into the brain dead stupefaction of America. If you want intellectual discourse, if you want truly alternative points of view, which are more mainstream, by the way, than the mainstream points of view, you have to support independent journalism. Independent journalism means that they are independent because you help them be independent. You are supporting the quality of their work. Danny Haiphong puts out extraordinarily high quality work. Everywhere I go, people talk about Danny Haiphong's show. I was just doing an interview, say, I see you're going on to Danny. He started the program by, I see you on Danny's program. Well, Danny has a whole bunch of people on his program. It doesn't happen free of charge. So support Danny Haiphong, support Brian Bertolek, support Gilbert Doctorow, and support me if you see it. But the bottom line is independent media only exists with your support. And I would ask that you continue to support me, Danny, and everybody else who's in this business. We all can't think alike. We all can't think alike. And there are people out there who disagree with me, and I disagree with them. I would never advocate for them being shut down. I would only advocate for their continue to be support, because the more we challenge each other, the more we have to double check our facts and figures, the more it create the impetus for me to go back to Russia to learn more, to bring that back. And so that can only happen, though, with your support. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. So again, thanks for having me on, Danny. And I thank your audience for supporting you, for supporting me, for supporting everybody. But most of all, for not watching mainstream media and getting your information from these and other programs.
I couldn't have said it better myself, everyone. So you heard Scott. You can hit the like button so more people can hear just what Scott said here. Go to the video description. You can find scottritter.com. You can support his work. Definitely do that. I want to thank those who became a member today. There was this question, Scott, if you wanted to hit at this for 30 seconds. Where are they getting the jet fuel to maintain this way? That's a good question. 30 seconds or less. Where are they?
The military, of course, has its own closed loop, and we will acquire jet fuel. We can get it regionally and all that stuff. But the military has capabilities to acquire fuel that the civilian market doesn't have. The other thing is the military can pay more. That's why we spend $1.2 trillion on the
money. Yeah. I mean, the military is one of the biggest polluters on the planet. It uses a lot of energy, needs a lot of energy. So with all that said, though, Scott, great to be with you. We're going to head out together. Hit the like button as you go on. Video description where you can find where to support Scott in this show. I'll be back tomorrow. I'll let you know what is happening then. I think it'll be 12 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow, and I'll announce that later on. All right, everyone. Bye-bye.